Good morning. We are having a seminar on acute intestinal obstruction, and we have three speakers. Dr. Ganesh Guru will speak on etiopathogenesis of acute intestinal obstruction. So, Dr. Bhatt, we start?
Yeah, please start. Ganesh Guru, please, you can proceed.
Good morning, sir. Intestinal obstruction. Intestinal obstruction is a condition in which the intestinal contents are prevented from traveling distally. Clinical features: pain abdomen. Pain abdomen is typically colicky pain abdomen. This colicky pain abdomen corresponds to peristalsis. They are centered in the umbilicus.
You skip this part because this will be
right.
You talk
about types of obstruction: dynamic obstruction or adynamic obstruction. Dynamic obstruction is a condition in which there is a proper mechanical obstruction is present within the lumen or in the intramural or from external. Adynamic is the thing in which there is no mechanical obstruction. In dynamic obstruction, there is peristalsis present. The peristalsis is initially hyperperistaltic in order to overcome the obstruction. This peristalsis is progressive in nature. As the bowel gets distended, the wall becomes weak and flaccid, and the peristalsis also becomes weak. In adynamic obstruction, peristalsis may or may not be present. Even if it is present, it is non-progressive. Cause of obstruction, like in pediatric newborn and newborn neonates, most common cause is the duodenal atresia. In infants and children, it is intussusception. In adults, both in the small bowel and large bowel, common is adhesions are the most common cause of obstruction. Newborn, some of the common causes are duodenal atresia, jejunal atresia, annular pancreas, midgut volvulus, and meconium milpias. Even though the incidence of jejunal atresia is more than the duodenal atresia, the frequency of obstruction is more common with the duodenal atresia. Annular pancreas is due to the failure of rotation of the ventral duct. Duodenal atresia and annular pancreas often coexist. Midgut volvulus is a congenital condition associated with black smell. Meconium ileus is a condition in which there is a thick blacky stools in the distal parts of the ileum and the large intestine. Infants and children, intussusception, hernia, and tumor are some of the common causes. Small bowel dynamic causes include adhesions, hernias, tumors, strictures, gallstones, and Bessar's. Adynamic paralytic ileus and mesenteric ischemia. Large bowel dynamic causes include stricture, volvulus cancer. Adynamic includes Ogilvie syndrome, pseudo-obstruction. Paralytic ileus, it is a failure of transmission of peristaltic waves secondary to neuromuscular failure. Pathophysiology behind it is increased central sympathetic activity and masking of parasympathetic activity. Paralytic ileus is most common after post-surgical conditions and an electrolyte imbalance. Hypokalemia and uremia are the most common electrolyte abnormalities associated with paralytic ileus. Other conditions associated with paralytic ileus includes diabetes mellitus, trauma, burns, sepsis, and chronic illness. Pseudo-obstruction or Ogilvie syndrome. Ogilvie syndrome is the acute form of pseudo-obstruction. The pathogenesis beginning, this is a disruption in the pelvic sacral plexus. Usually in pseudo-obstruction, there is peristalsis up to the splenic pressure. Beyond the splenic pressure of colon, the peristalsis is usually absent. Causes include metabolic causes. Diabetes mellitus is most commonly associated with pseudo-obstruction, followed by hypokalemia, uremia, and hypothyroidism. Others include trauma, shock, idiopathic, drugs like TCS, laxatives, smoking, caffeine, scleroderma, and Chagas disease. Other adynamic causes: mesenteric ischemia. Mesenteric ischemia can be acute and chronic. Acute mesenteric ischemia has three types: arterial, venous, and non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia. Non-occlusive mesenteric ischemia is due to vasospasm. The vasospasm may be either due to vasopressin, shocks, or drug abuse. Venous, due to thromboembolism, it is most common in the inferior mesenteric vein. Arterial may be embolic episode or thrombotic episode. Embolic episode is most common in the distal part of superior mesenteric artery, whereas thrombotic episode is most common in the proximal part of the superior mesenteric artery. In this condition, there is typically pain out of proportion, and the diarrhea is usually spurious diarrhea followed by bloody diarrhea. Chronic mesenteric ischemia is either arterial venous. Chronic venous ischemia is associated with portal hypertension. So while treating it, both portal hypertension should be treated. In chronic arterial mesenteric ischemia, there is a collateral formation. So in order to call it as chronic mesenteric ischemia, there must be at least blockage of 2 out of 3 splanchnic vessels. Clinical features are typically intestinal angina and cytopenia. Dynamic obstruction. Coming to the interlunar cause include impacted stools, Bessar's, gallstone ileus, tumors, and sometimes roundworm infections after the therapy. Bessar's, phytobessars. These phytobessars are common in the African population and in the post-vagotomic cases and gastric paralysis. Rapunzel syndrome. That Rapunzel syndrome is most common in the psychiatric patients. Gallstone ileus is due to the cholecystoenteric fistula. Gallstone ileus is characterized by regular striate in which there is ectopic gallstone, features of intestinal obstruction and pneumobilium. Into susception, it is an intramural cause in which there is a telescoping of one bowel into the other, usually proximal into distal. Based on the pathology, it is classified into primary and secondary. In primary, there is no obvious intestinal pathology. This usually occurs in the infants between 6 to 12 months of age. As soon as the bleeding is started, there will be hypertrophy of Peyer's patches. Others include a lower respiratory tract infection, typically of rhinovirus. Second is due to obvious intestinal pathology, which this intestinal pathologies act as a lead points. Meckel's diverticulum, appendicitis are the common causes in children up to 2 to 3 years of age, whereas GIST, polyp and tumors are the common causes in adults. Clinical features is sausage of the mass and Leigh-Dan's sign. That is Leigh-Dan's empty right iliac fossa. Types based on the telescoping are antegrade and retrograde. Antegrade include ilioileal, iliopoli, colopoly. Retrograde is mostly after a bariatric surgery and bypass surgeries, jejunal-gastric type of thing. There is a composite intersusception is there. There is more presence of more than two intersusceptions. Volvulus is the rotation of bowel on its own axis. This leads to closed loop obstruction and rapid progression to gangrene perforation. Sigmoid volvulus and cecal volvulus. Sigmoid volvulus is common in the elderly male patient around 5th to 6th decade. These patients are usually constipated. Causes of it are the overloaded pelvic colon, long pelvic mesocolon, and narrow attachments. Cecal volvulus is common after pregnancy, idiopathic or floppy cecal syndrome. In pregnancy, 3rd trimester, there is lateral displacement of cecum. This leads to narrowing of mesentery and stretching of mesenteric vessels. So this leads to cecal volvulus. Immediately after the delivery, there is relaxation of this. This also leads to volvulus. Midgut volvulus is a congenital condition. It is associated with latch plant. During the embryonic period, there usually occurs rotation of gut, but due to the presence of this latch plant, there is no rotation of gut and no widening of mesentery, but the lengthening of the intestinal mesentery happens. It leads to long redundant mesentery. In this condition, cecum lies in the left upper quadrant. Adhesions are the most common cause of obstruction. Any source of peritoneal irritation will result in local fibrin production. This leads to adhesion between opposed surfaces. Causes include infection, foreign body inflammation, radiation, and injury. Pathogenesis in this peritoneal injury, infection, irradiation. This leads to inflammation, followed by fibrinous exudate and fibrinous adhesion. This fibrinous adhesion may get completely resolved by peritoneal plasminogen activation, or it may converted into dense fibrous tissue and form permanent adhesions. Hernia and adhesions are the most common cause of obstruction in the Indian subcontinent. Hernias may be external or internal. Some of the common external hernias associated with obstruction include inguinal, femoral, obturator, and paraumbilical. Internal hernias may be congenital or acquired. Acquired conditions like Peterson hernia, Stummer's hernia in case of post-bariatric surgeries and gastric bypass surgeries. Congenital hernias that occurs through the congenital defects include hernia through foramen of Winslow, right and left paraduodenal hernias through defect in the mesentery, transverse mesocolon. Other causes like strictures, Crohn's strictures most common in the Western population. TB strictures due to TB is common in Indian subcontinent and malignancy.
Yes, Guru. So you have nicely described, elaborately, you have said the etiology and the pathogenesis. Actually, why we require to know all these things? Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So why it needs? So actually, if we know in our background that these are the positive causes, and if we take the history from the patient properly, if we examine the patient properly, so we can diagnose, we can keep in our mind that these are the possible diagnoses, so that we can manage the patient early. So this is the criteria of knowing all these things. Okay. So you have nicely divided. The thing is that it is not possible clinically to differentiate in so many ways. So we should think of whether it is a large bowel obstruction or the small bowel obstruction. Okay, this is the thing we shall have to differentiate first. And second, if we think of it as large bowel obstruction, so we shall have to intervene at the earliest possible. Otherwise, the complication will be more. So if it is small bowel obstruction, and clinically if we see that the patient's abdomen is soft, nothing is there, so we can delay it. So we should know what are the consequences. Suppose the obstruction can be complete or it can be partial. Okay. So if it is complete, then there is an proximal dilatation and there is an segment that is known as, and behind this there is a collapse segment. So we should keep in our mind what happens due to the dilatation. So whenever there is an peristalsis, so it tries to overcome that obstruction. So patient, rightly you said, the colicky abdominal pain, and gradually it will come, and 4 to 5 minutes interval, and gradually after few hours the pain won't be there. So there will be the peristalsis movement is less due to the they are tired, the gut is tired. So patient gut will be distended. So what is the consequence of this distension? So distension, due to that accumulation, that is third phase loss. These are the real pathology or pathogenesis. If we know, then only we can treat the patient properly. So we shall have to think of the proximal dilatation. So what happens? If it is in the upper area, I mean, if it is complete, the patient will present with the vomiting. So fluid electrolyte imbalance and the dehydration will be more. And side by side, patient will be alkalosis, metabolic alkalosis. If it is in the distal part of the small gut, so the accumulation will be more and more fluid will be there within the intestine. So what will be there? So there will be the distension. If there is distension, we know that the intestine is nothing but a mobile elastic lumen in and another abdominal cavity. Okay, so there will be the more and more distension. If there is a more and more distension, there is an increase in the intra-abdominal pressure. So these are the consequences of first thing dilatation, second thing is third space loss and the electrolyte imbalance, hypovolemia, followed by increase intra-abdominal distension. So if there is distension, there is venous return is less, ultimately dehydration. That combining these two conditions, the patient will be in shock. So this is the basic thing we must know. This is the real pathology or the pathogenesis. That is what you have discussed. Nicely you have discussed, but these are the basic thing we must know just to reduce the mortality and morbidity of the patient. Okay. So anything else, Makunda, please?
Actually, I was expecting Dr. Ganesh to speak more on the etiopathogenesis. He spoke more on the present, because the one point you mentioned is nice, that there are some pathologies, like he said that commonest pathology is adhesion, and he has described the mechanism of adhesion formation. Now, go into the depth of this adhesion formation, there are some grades of adhesion, because if you know the grades, you need know how easy or difficult the surgery will be. There are Juliet grade of adhesion. That means if it starts with grade 1, these are flimsy adhesions. You can separate the adhesions by fingers. They are avascular flimsy adhesions. Grade 2 is
vascularization.
Flimsy adhesions, plus there are some areas of adhesions which are vascular and which need to be divided by scissors. Grade 3 is there are dense adhesions in the interloop and the parietis, which are vascular and needs to be divided by sharp dissection. And grade 4 adhesions are dense adhesions where you need to lyse adhesion by sharp dissection. They are vascular and often associated with gut injury. So if you know the grade, you can decide about what surgery you're going to do. Second is, you should have talked about the etiopathogenesis of the obstruction is there are some anatomical changes in the abdomen, in the gut itself, and there are some biochemical effect of this obstruction. The anatomical changes are what? One is, Dr. Bhattacharya has talked in detail that once you have an obstruction, proximal to obstruction, there is dilatation. And distal to that is collapse, number 1. Number 2, once this obstruction occurs, because of the stretching of the gut wall, there is compression of the venous return. And once venous return gets congested, there is congestion of blood in the lumen and the wall of the gut. And that may lead to strangulation. So one of the important pathogenesis in intestinal obstruction is simple obstruction. And then when there is vascular compromise, it goes to strangulation. And strangulation can occur by simple stretching or by compression of the vessel. You have talked of mesenteric ischemia. Mesenteric ischemia is a different entity. Mesenteric ischemia is different. It's not exactly the intestinal obstruction. Mesenteric ischemia may present like symptom of obstruction or strangulation, but mesenteric ischemia is a different entity. Second is you should have talked more on closed loop obstruction. Closed loop obstruction is what? In simple obstruction, there is one point of obstruction. In closed loop obstruction, there are 2 points of obstruction, like in external hernias, volvulus. And what is the peculiarity of closed loop obstruction? In closed loop obstruction, you have an obstruction at 2 points, and the zenith of distension occurs in this closed loop. And before the proximal distension starts, patient has complication out of the closed loop itself, and patient can present and you start managing the patient. So these are the specific areas where closed loop obstruction can occur. One is external hernias obstruction, volvulus, a late colonic carcinoma with a competent ileocecal valve. So these are the examples of closed loop obstruction. If you talk of biochemical obstruction, Dr. Bhattacharya has partly described the biochemical changes. If you have high small bowel obstruction, patient has more of vomiting, less of sequestration of small gut fluid. So this patient will have dehydration, hyponatremia, hypokalemia, hypochloremic alkalosis. Patient who has got distal obstruction, there is no sequestration of fluid in the intestinal lumen, which are alkaline. So patient will have dehydration, hyponatremia, and patient will have metabolic acidosis. So because your management is based on this pathogenesis. Okay, so these are the things you should touch on while describing the etiopathogenesis of intestinal obstruction. So these are the situations where based on your etiopathogenesis, the management and presentation will vary. Patient has got simple obstruction, one type presentation, one type management. Patient has got strangulation obstruction, we will have a different presentation and different form of management. Okay, so any other comments from any other participants? Any comments? Any question? No. Okay.
So we know one point, so I didn't describe. So as because the most of the cases we have seen there is edema. So initially when there is intraluminal pressure, there is a lymphatic obstruction initially. As because the lymphatic obstruction, we can see that the wall of the gut is edematous, followed by there is venous obstruction. Rightly, Makhanda has said, if it is the closed loop obstruction, the ischemia is more, as because the intraluminal pressure is very high, and so capillary pressure, it exceeds the pressure of the capillary. So the ischemia is more and more. So we should keep in our mind that if it is probably the closed loop syndrome, then we should intervene at the earliest possible. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, one question is pain out of proportion in SMA occlusion, because you see, when there is SMA occlusion, there is extensive gangrene of the small gut. So patient who are having a pain, it may appear that the pain is so severe because of underlying gut strangulation and peritonism. That's why in case of a vascular occlusion, as the patient has a gangrenous gut underneath, in that case, pain becomes constant, continuous. And that pain is out of proportion to the underlying pathology. There may be a small area of gut gangrene, but patient has severe pain, which is uncontrolled with the usual analgesics. So next speaker will be Dr. Aaron Jyoti, who will speak on
one point. So I think this is the what we said, radiation induced obstruction. It occurs. But
Yeah.
though it is chronic, it can be acute as well. So we should keep in our mind the
Yeah,
radiation.
yes. Relation cause
Radiation is-
relation stricture or by adhesion formation.
by adhesion. Okay. Okay.
Good morning, sir. Today my topic is clinical features and investigations. Clinical features. Cardinal features of intestinal obstruction are abdominal pain, nausea and vomiting, abdominal distension, and constipation. Symptoms. Abdominal pain. A crampy abdominal pain occurs in paroxysms in obstruction. This abdominal pain stimulates due to the peristaltic activity in case of obstruction. If site of obstruction usually indicate, if it is pain is central, usually suspects of small bowel, and if it is lower abdomen, usually suspect of large bowel. Usually it is occurs in paroxysms. If it is high, as obstruction progresses, pain becomes the dull and constant pain. If patient is complains of continuous severe pain, one has to suspect the strangulation or perforation. Pain usually won't be there in the paralytic ileus conditions. Next comes the vomiting. Vomiting is more common in the high proximal small bowel obstructions, and it is late manifestation in the large bowel obstruction. Nature of vomiting: as patient vomits, patient has signs of symptoms of dehydration, and nature of vomiting is also important because as obstruction progresses, the bacterial overgrowth occurs and the digestive becomes the fecal. Bacterial overgrowth causes the digestion and fecal material patient may vomit. Abdominal distension is more with the distal obstruction, and abdominal distension is absent in the mesenteric muscular occlusion conditions. Constipation, more with the lower or complete obstruction conditions. It may be absolute, means no fecus or flatus, or relative, with the flattest part. Absolute condition would apply in the distal hernia, in which the wall of sac is formed by a part of bowel wall, and gallstones, mesenteric muscular occlusion, obstruction associated with pelvic access conditions in case of partial obstruction. Clinical features vary according to the site of obstruction, which is small bowel or large bowel. In small bowel, high or low. In case of high small bowel obstruction, there is early feature of vomiting, and patient may present with the signs of dehydration. Signs of dehydration may occur due to poor oral intake, and due to vomiting, and due to sequestration of fluid. In case of low small bowel, patient may present with the abdominal pain with the distension. In case of large bowel obstruction, patient may present with the distended abdomen and the constipation, and vomiting is a late feature. Duration of obstruction, acute and chronic. In case of pathology, valvulus interception, it may vary depending upon the pathology. Patient in interception, patient presents with the recurrent attacks of pain abdomen. In between, patient seems normal. Presence or absence of ischemia. Simple as strangulation. In strangulation, severe constant pain, tenderness with rigidity, and shock usually present. On examination, one has to examine on general examination signs of dehydration and fever. Usual fever suspects of in case of strangulation. In case of any conditions like abscess is the cause of obstruction. In hypothermia, usual suspect in case of septic shock and the long duration. In local examination, on inspection, one has to check for any distension of abdomen, any scars present, visible peristalsis, masses, and any case of obstruction has to check for hernial orifices. On palpation, tenderness, any tenderness, rigidity, and masses. On percussion, tympanic note. Auscultation, due to hyperperistaltic in early cases of obstruction, there is high-pitched bowel sound. As obstruction progresses, bowel becomes flaccid and paralyzed, maybe silent abdomen, and distal rectum, one has checked for any ballooning, any mass, or blade of fecus in case of infection of volvulus. Coming to investigations, diagnostic evaluation should focus on following goals: determine the level and cause of obstruction, discriminate partial or complete, discriminate simple versus strangulation, distinguish mechanical obstruction from veneers. Plain radiography. Plain radiography, once there is an obstruction, bowel is distended by gas, and it varies, and sensitivity is 70 to 80%. And most specific trial for small bowel obstruction is dilated small bowel loops, which is more than 3 centimeters in diameter, and air fluid level in upper X-ray, it is more than 3, and paucity of air in colon. It is plain radiography is low specificity due to ileus and colonic obstruction beneath the same functions. Plain radiography include false negative in case of proximal small bowel obstruction, where there is distension is less due to vomiting, and when bowel lumen is filled with fluid without gas, where there is, it will upload the air fluid levels. The picture showing the multiple air fluids in the erect X-ray. Usually, liquid air fluid differentiation occurs in the late stages, and it is in the large bowel obstruction. It's in the periphery, and in the one can see the hostile folds. It's a X-ray showing the sigmoid volvulus and the CT abdomen. Its sensitivity is 80 to 90%, and specificity is 70 to 90% in small bowel obstruction. In small bowel obstruction, findings is CTR, dilatation of proximal bowel with collapse of distal bowel, intraluminal contrast doesn't pass beyond transition zone, and colon contain little gas or fluid. It provides evidence of closed loop obstruction and strangulation. CT scan offers global evaluation of abdomen, so it reveals the etiology. It is low sensitive in defining low grade or partial obstruction. The picture is showing the ventral hernia with the fecal matrix and contain dilated ascending cola and collapse of descending cola, and the small bowel fecal sign. In the interception case, you can see in the target sign, concentric rings. Small bowel contrast series. It is limited use in acute setting because and one has to use water soluble contrast like gastrography. Useful in recurrent and chronic obstruction, it may reveal define the level of obstruction or neural causes. Can be used to differentiate mechanical from ileus. Enteroclysis. It is a double contrast technique used in enteroclysis. Permits a better assessment of mucosal surface and detection of relatively small lesions even through overlapping small bowel loops. Greater sensitivity than small bowel contrast series. The class I'm showing in the interception cases through barium imaging. Ultrasound, because of distension due to a test hole, one can see the free fluid, any masses and pattern of pixels. MRI CT scan. Colonoscopy is useful in case of malignancy and volvulus. Laboratory investigations is useful in assessing the severity of obstruction, not in diagnosing. Complete picture where in case of there is leukocytosis in conditions of strangulation or fever conditions, and serum electrolytes to assess the dehydration and raised hematocrit and hyponatremia, hypokalemia, and arterial blood gas analysis and renal function test. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jyoti. You have given all the investigation series what we can do, but practically we should think of what are the possibilities we can do whenever a patient comes to us with an intestinal obstruction or pain abdomen. So if we take the proper history, so what proper history, the past history can give us some idea. Suppose if the patient is having the past history of tuberculosis, pulmonary tuberculosis 20 years back, now patient presented with an pain in abdomen. So this we should keep in our mind, possibility is the intestinal tuberculosis or abdominal tuberculosis. So history is very interesting. If we take the meticulous history, suppose the adhesion, patient has undergone operation, lower abdominal operation, or the gynecological operation, or the lower abdominal and malignancy, retroperitoneal tumor. See, if we do that and if there is any history, so if we get that history, so we should keep in our mind the possibility this is the band and adhesion or adhesion. And third thing, if there is any sign of incision, so there is possibility of the herniation as well. So if we take the proper history of the patient, so we can have few diagnoses from the very beginning. So besides this, whenever a patient comes to us, we then features of intestinal obstruction, what you said, the colic abdominal pain, correct, and followed by gradually vomiting, or vomiting first followed by colic abdominal pain, either way. So what we should do first? So in my opinion, we should do one X-ray abdomen. It should be in the supine. If we think of, yes, we can add to that the straight X-ray. Why? So if we do the supine, that will give us a dilatation of the small gut or the large gut. So we should think of in that way. From there, we can assess whether the obstruction is the small gut obstruction or the large gut obstruction. If we see that valvular convenuitis is there, what you have described, fluid level is there, so we can assess it is probably the small bowel obstruction. So in the another points we should keep in our mind, you said rightly, if the straight X-ray abdomen shows the dilated loop of the small gut, more than 3 centimeter. So we should keep in our mind probably, yes, there is a dilatation. That dilatation, what happens? We should check then the fluid level is there or not. So if the fluid level is there, so we should check the height of the fluid level. In suppose this is the loop, this is the loop. The loop, if we see that in the same loop, the height of the fluid level is different. One is 5, another is 2.5. The difference is 2. Then we should keep in our mind that probably it is an intestinal obstruction. So as rightly you said, the normal you will get the 3 fluid level in the fundus of the stomach, in the duodenum and the cecum. So this is 100% correct. So we should know another thing. There is a mnemonic 3, 6 and 9. 3 means if there is any small gut dilatation more than 3 centimeters, then we should keep, yes, probably it is dilated, so possibility of intestinal obstruction. Second thing, if there is dilatation more than the 6 centimeter or 5.5, few books says the 5.5 centimeter in the transverse colon or the descending colon, so we should keep probably this is dilatation. But in the proximal colon, if find it is more than 9, if cecum is more than 9, then we should think of probably cecum is dilated. So from the straight X-ray abdomen, with these differences, we can assess whether it is the small gut or the large gut obstruction. Besides this, as rightly you said, if it is the jejunal, we will see the multiple folds, that is known as the valvular convenuity. We will see. But if it is ileal, as because the folds are not thick, we won't get. So this is known as the featureless. But occasionally, so it is very easy to see, but it is seen occasionally. If it is the lower gut obstruction, that is small gut obstruction, we might see the fluid is collected within the tube. So there is an impression of pseudotumor, the dilated gut. So fluid is there, no air. So it will give an impression that is a rounded shadow in the center, that is homogeneous opacity. This is known as the pseudotumor sign. Or occasionally you might see, besides the valvular convenuities, it is not prominent, but as because the loop is there in the distal jejunum. So what happens? The fluid is there, whitish area will be there in between radially. If we see the fluid, not fluid, that is the air is trapped within the folds. So that is another, we can assess probably it is the small bowel obstruction. Rightly you said the sensitivity is more with the, you said CT, but in most of our peripheral hospital, only with that straight X-ray abdomen or the supine, we should assess whether this is an intestinal obstruction, small gut or the large gut. Again, if we do an straight X-ray abdomen, we can see the fluid level, that is free gas under the domes of the diaphragm. That will give us an idea whether there is the closed loop obstruction and the perforation, or the stricture, functional dilatation followed by perforation, or ischemia due to the perforation. We can assess in that way. So we should keep in our mind, as because if we be in the periphery, we don't get the CT. So we shall have to find the clinical assessment along with this only straight X-ray abdomen and the biochemicals, what you have said, we should diagnose ourselves. And if that facilities is there, that is can do, yes, they can add so many things. What you said, the site of the obstruction, we can assess from there, correct? We can see whether there is the gangrene or ischemia of the gut wall is not. That is non-emergent. Even if we give the contrast, there won't be enhancement. So this is known as the non-enhancement loop. Other gut loop will be enhanced, but that particular loop won't be enhanced. So in that way, we can assess to some extent as well whether the patient is having the gangrenous loop along with the clinical features. So we shouldn't forget the clinical features we will see on the CT. No, we should always keep in our mind, clinics is the key, clinics is the key, clinic is the key. So CT whatever you say, it is off to some extent. So we should keep in our mind the clinic is the criteria. And third thing you said, yes, correct. Barium follow through. Nowadays, nobody is doing. And in the case of obstruction, if we want to know whether it is a complete obstruction or the partial obstruction, if someone is interested, barium we can't give. We should give the water soluble dye, so that can be given. But even if you give, you should do and delayed film. Why? If there is a stagnation for a prolonged period that is more than 24 hours, then we can assess, yes, the obstruction is complete. Most of the cases it has been shown that, as because if it is the lower down, there is huge accumulation of the fluid. So whenever the dye is coming, whatever we have given, nearly 200 ml or 1 liter, that will be diluted. So we can't assess from there the whether even after 24 hours after whether there is stagnation or not. So these are the fallacies. So we should keep in our mind. If we see in the straight X-ray abdomen, the large gut is dilated, small gut is dilated, as well as the air is there, or the large gut is dilated, then we should keep in our mind, possibly can it be an paralytic ileus, or can it be whatever you said, Ogilvie syndrome, we should keep in our mind. So if we think of in that way, so barium enema, yes, we can do the barium enema if we think of it is the volvulus, but it should be done carefully and under fluoroscopic guidance, which is not available in the every hospital, or that is the competent radiologist might not be available. So thinking that, so two things we should, based on the two things, I feel the straight X-ray abdomen and CT scan is more than enough for us to diagnose the intestinal obstruction. If experienced radiologist is there, yes, we can proceed for other investigation as well. I think this is sufficient for us, but don't think of the only investigation, and you should, suppose the patient has come to you, you have clinically examined the patient now, in the evening you should come and you should check it. If the patient develops muscle guarding without tenderness, though it was not there in the morning, so pain is not there, so we are really thinking that yes, obstruction has gone, but no, this is not the obstruction has gone, the paralytic ileus is developed, no intestinal peristalsis, so there is probably a paralytic ileus, so peristalsis movement is there, no pain. So besides it, whether there is any gangrene or not, so we can assess. If you see that in the evening, you have abdomen have palpated and you have seen the muscle guarding and rebound tenderness is there, so you should keep in your mind, don't delay it. So you should explore the patient at the earliest possible. I think this is from my side. Anything else?
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Bhattacharya has brought on the important points. What I like to emphasize in the postgraduate discussion is, you see, although we are doing a lot of plain X-rays, there is very limited role of a plain X-ray in evaluation of intestinal obstruction, because it gives you only the air fluid level and gas shadows. You cannot diagnose the cause of obstruction. You cannot diagnose any evidence of strangulation. So it can be a investigation, but there is little reliance on the plain X abdomen. The gold standard investigation for small bowel obstruction is a contrast CT scan. Okay, that too, if you have obvious features of strangulation, in that case, a CT scan may not be required. If there is all telltale symptoms and signs of strangulation, the dictum is resuscitate and proceed for surgery. But in other cases, a CT scan gives a very good information about the patient regarding the site of obstruction, the cause of obstruction, and a good CT scan in contrast can pick up the evidence of strangulation. There will be ischemia in the bowel wall that can be picked up. And again, as Dr. Bhattacharya said, you should take a delayed flip. If in contrast CT, you find after 24 hours, the contrast has not reached the colon, that indicates a obstruction which is complete, and they are the patients who merit early surgery if the contrast is not going to the colon in the 24 hours time. So these are all important investigations. She has started all the investigation. These are all important, but less reliance on plain X-ray, more reliance on CT scan. And in some cases, you can do just a oral contrast study with a water soluble contrast. And sometimes it is said that it is an adhesive obstruction. It can sometimes be therapeutic. That patient can relieve of the obstruction because of osmosis. It draws water, and this increases the peristalsis, and this can relieve the obstruction. Okay. So I think we can proceed on to the management of small bowel obstruction. Dr. Shumon Pal, third year PG at MR Bangalore, will speak on management of intestinal obstruction. So you have talked about the investigation. You can speak more on treatment.
Yeah.
Good morning, sir. I'll be taking the intestinal obstruction management part. I'm second year DMU PGT, general surgery, MMPH. As a whole, the management can be divided into two groups. One is non-operative management and the operative management. First, going with the non-operative management. The approach of non-operative management is successful in 62 to 85% of cases, though the rate of success in this condition depend on the selection of the patient, the etiology of the obstruction, the type of bowel obstruction, and also the surgeon's threshold. While doing this non-operative management, we have to take care that of those things, that whether there is absence of peritonitis or there is absence of progressive leukocytosis, or there is no sign of impairment of perfusion to the bowel wall on imaging, then only we can go for the non-operative management. But if there is any suspicion of ischemia, if there is large bowel obstruction or closed loop obstruction or acutely incarcerated or strangulated hernia, then we should not opt for this type of management. A related contraindication to this condition is that complete small bowel obstruction, dilated small bowel intestine with no air in the bowel distally. Now, the non-operative management proper. Basically, this non-operative management starts when the patient comes to the emergency and we have to resuscitate the patient with quick history and quick general observation of the patient. The things already described by my previous speaker, that there is severe loss of sodium that gets depicted by the electrolyte imbalances and volume displacement within the body. So we have to take care volume of by the volume resuscitation with the help of normal saline or Hartmann solution. And we have to regularly monitor the electrolytes and properly manage this electrolyte disbalance along with the acid-base imbalance that is generally found in this kind of obstructions. As my previous speakers have already said, that in the upper we will get the metabolic alkalosis, and in the lower type of obstruction we will get the metabolic alkalosis. All this has to be taken care of along with nasogastric decompression with vented or non-vented tube like rice or saline tube. Altogether, after resuscitation, we stand at the transition of non-operative management and the operative management. And in this case, the decision plays a vital role, where I have taken resort to a textbook where it gives us an idea of what is soluble contrast. If there is signs and symptoms of small bowel obstruction and the signs are not signifying the peritonitis or ischemic bowel, so we can go for nasogastric tube decompression with IV fluid resuscitation and proper management of the intake and output. We can go for administration of water soluble contrast agent. And if we find the contrast in the right column at 8 hours, then we can go for paroral challenge. If there is no contrast at 24 hours, then and worsening clinical signs are there, we have to go for surgery. Now the thing is when to operate. Presence of strangulation obstruction with symptomatized by the fever, tachycardia, leukocytosis, localized tenderness, continuous abdominal pain, peritonitis. We can check all this, and if any of the three is present, then it has 82% predictive value in depicting there is a strangulation heart obstruction. And presence of any four gives a 100% predictive value. Not only that, we can go with the free air, presence of free air and signs of closed loop obstruction in the abdominal radiograph. If there is signs of gross peritonitis, or if there is evidence of ischemia in the CT scan of the abdomen, which is manifested by pneumatosis intestinalis or bowel valve thickening, portal venous gash, generalized ascites, non-enhancement of the bowel valve, then we have to go for operative management, obviously. Now, operative management proper. The choice of operative approach, basically how we enter into the abdomen if required. We need an adequate exposure and proper visibility of the gut. So basically, we can go for median cellulotomy, median laparotomy approach. In those cases where generally the patient has no history of previous operation, abdominal operations, or there is remote operative approach in the abdomen, or if some patient may come where following an operation where there is a development of intestinal obstruction, in that case we can approach the same operative site if no adhesion was there while doing the original operation. A situation may arise where there was a definite kind of adhesions while doing the original operation. In that case, the same incision site can be approached, but the extreme aims to be start with and then come to the central part of the incision that can be done. Now, principle of operations. Main principle after entering into the abdomen, we will identify the cause and the site of the obstruction. Then care should be taken while handling the obstructed gut, because that is found that where there is obstruction, it can remain fixed to an apparent site of obstruction, and that part is more prone to infarction and strangulation, and that leads to dilatation of the proximal end, which causes a thinning of the wall, which makes it prone to rupture, and that may lead to spillage of the bacterial laden entry contents into the abdomen. So we have to take care at that point. And when we have taken care of all the obstructions, we have to check all the 4 quadrants of the abdomen to look for any second site of obstruction is there or not, all the injuries have been taken care of or not, or there is any other problem in the abdomen or not. And then accordingly, we will choose the anastomotic techniques if required. If there is any small gut loop is involved, which is required to be taken care of, then we can go for primary anastomosis and resection and primary anastomosis. If we find that there is peritonitis present, then we go for stoma formation. And generally, as far as the anastomosis is concerned, side to side, end to side anastomosis is preferred, as because the proximal loop remains dilated in comparison to the distal loop, which remains decompressed in these conditions. Now, lastly, we generally face some problem, difficulty in abdominal closure in these conditions, and there intraoperative decompression techniques are followed, like manual retrograde decompression into the stomach, intraoperative passage of long intestinal tube performance of controlled enterotomy with passage of a decompressing tube. Among all this, the manual retrograde decompression into the stomach is the safest and the quickest technique, and it avoids enterotomy And it also avoids the excessive handling of the gut wall that prevents the spillage of bacteria into the blood. So it prevents bacteremia as such. The surgical treatment, the type of surgical treatment depends upon the cause of obstruction, like division of the band, adhesiolysis, excision, bypass. Once obstruction is relieved, bowel is checked for viability, and if non-viable, then resection is required. So, what are the indications of non-viability? Absence of peristalsis, loss of normal shine, that means the gut wall becomes dull and lustreless, loss of pulsation in the mesentery, green or black color of bowel, and intestinal musculature becomes flabby, thin, and friable. If there is doubt of viability, then we can wrap the affected gut with hot packs for 10 minutes with increased oxygen. Resection of the non-viable guts generally done with stoma formation generally. And in case of multiple ischemia of the gut, if ischemia at multiple sites of the gut, then second loop of laparotomy may be required within 24 to 48 hours. Now coming to the different situations that causes obstruction, like adhesion. For many times in the past until now, many processes has been tried, many procedures have been tried to prevent the adhesion formation. Use of cow cecum, sharp peritoneum proved unfruitful in all these cases. But nowadays, it has been tried application of absorbable biofilm to prevent the formation of fibrin bridges between two injured surfaces. During the post-operative period, during the time of healing and mesothelialization. But still, it is not free from any complication like leaks, abscess formation, sepsis, peritonitis has been found in these cases. So nowadays, use of hyperbaric oxygen, peritoneal cell transplantation, use of fetal liver cells, mesothelial cells has been tried nowadays. Now coming to the treatment proper for adhesion, the conservative treatment can be done, but up to 72 hours in some textbooks it says, a division of bands or minimal adhesiolysis, repeat adhesiolysis for the recurrent adhesions, Nobel's plication, Charles Phillips transmesenteric plication, or intestinal intubation can be tried for specifically for recurrent adhesions itself. Now coming to the another disease proper, intersusception, where firstly resuscitation is done with IPF, broad spectrum antibiotics, nasogastric drainage, as I say. In case of infants, therapeutic barium enema can be tried, but where there is a prominent lead point or there is a profound shock, it should not be tried, and it is contraindicated in case of peritonism or prolonged duration greater than 48 hours. Laparotomy with reduction can be tried, Cope's method, and at last, if required, if nothing goes for the resolution of it, then resection and anastomosis can be tried. Now, some special situation needs special mention, like early postoperative small bowel obstruction after Roux-en-Y gastric bypass surgery, radiation enteropathy, carcinomatosis with malignant conditions. Like early postoperative small bowel obstruction, two kind of patient can be found. One, people getting the obstruction evident within 10 days of operation, or obstruction appearing within 10 days to 6 weeks time period. And it has been found the intraperitoneal inflammatory reaction mostly occurs within the time period of 7 to 10 days to 6 to 12 weeks post-operative period. So reoperation is generally thought within this, after this time period, 6 to 12 weeks from the last laparotomy. And decision for the reoperation is generally taken in such a way that 6 weeks to 3 months is preferred for those people where relatively few adhesions were found in those patients while doing the ileotomy, where there was few adhesions. So there 6 weeks to 3 months time period is followed. And after 6 months followed, where there were extensive adhesiolysis to be has been done in during the time of original cellular. So what is the reason behind it? It has been found that by 6 months, the adhesions become mature and become less vascular, and frozen abdomen we can encounter frozen abdomen if we operate within 3 months time period. An obstruction is resolved as the adhesion matures within this time period also. Bowel obstruction after RYGP. Internal herniation is the most common cause, and meticulous closure of all potential hernia stresses with non-absorbable sutures at the time of RYGP can be helpful. Radiation enteropathy as such, palliative bypass of the disease segment with creation of an anastomosis in visibly normal tissue can help. And carcinomatosis and malignant obstruction, where there is solitary mass or metastasis causing intra or extraluminal obstruction, we can go for limited resection with bypass. And if multiple areas are involved with incurable malignant obstruction, tube gastrostomy, tube pharyngostomy can be tried. Now, as a paralytic IBS, general principles I will be talking about, like primary cause must be addressed first. Gastrointestinal distension must be relieved by decompression. Fluid and electrolyte imbalance that occurs in this condition that has to be taken care of. And prokinetic drugs is not helpful much in postoperative adynamic IBS. And in prolonged cases, CT scan helps to understand what is the status of the abdomen and whether to go for laparotomy again or not. Now, large bowel obstruction is called, again, as my previous speaker has described, acute and chronic conditions. We'll be talking about acute first. If the lesion involves the cecum, ascending colon, hepatic flexure, proximal transverse colon, we can go for emergency right hemicolectomy. If irremovable lesion is there, proximal stoma or iliotransverse bypass can be done. And if any obstructive lesion is there at the splenic flexure, extended right hemicolectomy with ilio-descending coronary anastomosis can be done. And if the lesion at the left colon or rectosigmoid junction, immediate resection to be resorted. But there is a contraindication if the surgeon is inexperienced or the patient is moribund or the disease has advanced a lot, then we can only defer it. Colostomies that can be done in large bowel obstructions of all procedure, Hartmann's procedure, and self-expanding metallic stains are also there, which helps in those patients who have high risk of post-operative morbidity and mortality in advanced incurable diseases where the success rate is 80 to 90%. And chronic cases, the surgical management following resuscitation is done. Now coming to the volvulus as such. In volvulus, two kind of volvulus where we generally deal with, cecal volvulus and sigmoid volvulus. Other volvulus are also there. I'll be talking about this too. Now, sigmoid volvulus, decompression can be tried with rigid sigmoidoscopy and colonoscopy, where the colonoscopy has a lower risk of complication, more effective in decompression. And if there is a recurrent volvulus, then we resort to sigmoid colectomy with or without anastomosis, generally in cases of the young patients, where there is 80% of mortality rate in case of older patients. That is why it is not tried in them. And where anastomosis is not possible, Hartmann's procedure is done. Other procedures are also there. Percutaneous endoscopic colostomy is recently fallen, and Paul Mikulicz procedure in impending granary is tried. Now, I am resorting to a flow chart given in a textbook, which gives us an idea that if there is a diagnosis of sigmoid volvulus, we go for resuscitation as we in different obstruction we do, fluid resuscitation and electrolyte correction. But if we find that there is a sign of peritonitis, gangrene perforation, and hemodynamic instability, then we will go for directly to surgical options like Hartmann's procedure of primary anastomosis. If there is no such signs, we will try for endoscopic detorsion with placement of rectal tube for ongoing decompression. And if it is successful, then we can look for the patient whether the patient is fit or unfit for the surgery. If the patient is fit for surgery, we will go for semi-elective sigmoid colectomy. If not, then expected management, and we will counsel the patient that there may be a chance of possible recurrence. Now coming to the cecal volvulus. Generally, what we do in case of sigmoid volvulus, we can't do here colonoscopy because there is a high risk of perforation and inability to reach the obstructed right colon. Ileocolic resection with or without anastomosis is tried in these cases, though it has a low recurrence rate, still high morbidity of 30% and mortality of 20%. Tube cecostomy is another option, that is when we tried in this case. Now coming to pseudo obstruction. As a whole, pseudo obstruction can be of the small bowel, can be of large bowel. In the small bowel, primary and secondary both are first the initial cause is taken care of. Then in the case of large bowel, where there are acute condition, which is also termed as Ogilvie syndrome or the chronic condition, we can resort to this flow chart, which helps us to understand that if there is abdominal distension or obstruction, that is the most common presentation of the intestinal obstruction, and the sign of peritonitis is there or subdiaphragmatic air is there, we have to directly go for laparotomy. If there is nothing such presentation, we can go for hyperenema, giving of hyperenema, and it gives, if it gives an idea of obstruction, then presence of obstruction, then we will go for Hartmann's operation and or loop colostomy directly. If no signs of obstruction is there, then NG tube placement, proper resuscitation by correction of the fluid and electrolyte imbalance, and we go for discontinuation of narcotics if any going. We will check the cecum diameter. If it is greater than less than 12 centimeter, we will observe for 12 to 24 hours. If it resolutes well, if it does not, then we will go for neostigmine or epidural anesthesia. If it's still no resolution, then colonoscopic decompression. And if still it fails, then laparotomy. And in laparotomy, if we find that there is ischemia and perforation is present, then resection, endostomy, and mucous fistula. And if there is no ischemia, then loop colostomy. Now, coming to some newborn conditions like duodenal atresia, duodenostomy, jejunal or ileal atresia, where resection and anastomosis can be done. Meconium ileus, which needs a special mention, can be of two types, uncomplicated and complicated. For uncomplicated, we give hyperosmolar gastrography enema, which causes the fluid comes from outside into the lumen and causes the release of it. And enterotomy and irrigation of the bowel can be tried. In complicated cases where resection and temporary stoma formation or primary anastomosis can be done. Bishop-Koop operation is a eponymous operation that used to be done earlier, now rarely used. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think he has elaborately described in different conditions. So it is correct. So basic treatment, whatever he said, it is correct. Thing is that what treatment will do electrolyte balance. So we should keep in our mind the nutritional status as well. Not only the electrolyte and the fluid. So we should keep in our mind the nutritional status of the patient. Suppose the patient is having pain abdomen for 8 to 10 days. Patient came to us with all these problems. So we should keep, or the patient is really the malignant patient from the very beginning, he can't eat. Now he developed intestinal obstruction. So in that case, a debilitated condition. So we should keep in our mind the nutritional status as well as the patient. And the operation, yes, nutritional resuscitation, electrolyte balance, and everything after doing what sorts of operation we will do, that will depend upon the site of obstruction, whether it is the small bowel. Again, in the small bowel, it is the higher small bowel obstruction, or it is the lower small bowel obstruction, or it is the colonic obstruction. So again, we shall have to divide. Is there any emergency of doing operation? If what emergency? He has nicely mentioned. If the strangulation is there, peritonitis is there, patient having all the features of peritonitis and sepsis. So in that case, so we should go at the earliest possible. We should keep in our mind probably there is a perforation, gangrene. So we should go after resuscitating the patient at the earliest possible. We should go by the laparotomy and do accordingly. And we should keep in our mind as well, we'll do minimum and give benefit to the patient maximum, as because this depends upon again the experience of the surgeon as well. Suppose there is some mass, so we shall have to resect it. But in this scenario, the patient condition is very poor. or it will take time. So the trauma will be more. So post-operative trauma, if it is more, catabolism will be more, mortality, morbidity will more. So that's why we should keep in our mind what sorts of treatment we should do. Always we should keep in our mind, do minimum and give the benefit to the patient. And he has nicely elaborated everything. One thing we should keep in our mind, if there is no abdominal distension and we can assess it is, yes, it is a small bowel obstruction. So low role of the laparoscopy is also there. Laparoscopy in acute abdomen, it can be obstruction. Suppose the patient is having the appendicitis ruptured, ultimately there is an abscess, and the following which the patient develop intestinal obstruction. So this is the case where we can intervene here through the laparoscopy, and you can suck out all the pus, whatever is there. Then the visibility is much more better than the laparotomy. So that we should also keep in our mind, that possibility is also there. So I think as because it is in the first subject and the different condition is different, so we shall have to think which condition is suitable for an individual patient. There is no dictum, but even then dictum is there, we can modify this, the which condition is suitable for this patient. Second thing he said about the adhesion. Okay, fine. So that's why it has been shown that the incidence of intestinal obstruction is coming down if we do the minimal access surgery. That is the minimal access colectomy, minimal access whatever intra-abdominal operation, minimal access gynecological operation. So that chapter is coming down, that is incidence of adhesion is coming down. And the incidence of hernia, that is, it is gradually increasing. Why? The laparotomy is more, operation is more, the chance of dehiscence is more. So that's why the scenario is changing. So proper respect to the tissue is the key thing while we are operating. Primarily, always we should keep in our mind the respect to the peritoneum, mostly the parietal peritoneum and the intestine. Whenever we are handling or any intra-abdominal structure what we are handling, we shouldn't handle this gut or any organ roughly. So minimum handling so that there is less chance of adhesion. So I think this is from my side. If anything is there, so Makunda will discuss, I think.
Dr. Pal has given a good outline of management in the form of algorithm. So these are the basic things that if you follow the algorithm, you can find out the exact management. So basically, a patient having interruption, the management is first is resuscitation. And after resuscitation, you try to differentiate clinically and by investigation whether is a simple obstruction or strangulation obstruction. Strangular obstruction needs early surgical treatment. And with simple obstruction, you can wait. And the dictum of 24 hours is still are not there now. People are saying that with the adhesive obstruction, you can wait up to 72 hours if the patient is not deteriorating. And even adhesive obstruction, there is a role for laparoscopic lysis of the band. So one should be very experienced and should be gentle care. You can do laparoscopic intervention. And again, for the volvulus we talked of, sigmoid volvulus particularly, there is a role for decompression. But for decompression to proceed, you have to exclude that there is no underlying strangulation. If the patient is having a strangulating large gut, the non-operative decompression is contraindicated. In that case, you should proceed and go for a resection and either proceed for a primary anastomosis or do a Hartmann's procedure or a proximal colostomy. Okay, so I think he has given a good idea about the management part. So any question or you can conclude. You see, access in laparoscopy in a distended bowel is always a open entry. There is no role for various introduction in case of a distended gut. So you should make a small nick and take an entry with your open port technique. Use a Hassan cannula. And then once you are in, you can descend the abdomen to some extent and then put further ports. So varus is contraindicated. Closed pneumo is contraindicated in case of intestinal obstruction. It should be always by open technique. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Welcome.
lot.
Welcome.
Thank you.